and welcome to the Islamic Finance Show. Every week on the programme, we focus on a particular element of Islamic finance to explore. And today, we'll be discussing the Sharia scholar system and the role of Sharia scholars. Now, to get this discussion underway, let me introduce my guest for today. Sharia advisor specialising in the structuring of Islamic financial products, Dr. Humayun Dar. He's also Director General at the Cambridge Institute of Islamic Finance. And also joining me is Dr. Samir Alamad, Head of Sharia Compliance and Product Development at Al Rayyan Bank. Welcome to the show, to the both of you. Samir, if I could start with you, could you just give us an insight into what it means to be a Sharia scholar? What does that role entail?
The word scholar, alim or mujtahid, the one who makes ijtihad, or faqih, jurist, all they refer to the same thing, the same meaning. And it's a defined term or word in Sharia with clear conditions and requirements for this individual to be called alim or scholar. Some scholars said they defined the conditions and requirements for a scholar. For example, they have to have a deep knowledge in Quran and Sunnah. They don't need to memorize all the Sunnah. They just need to understand the hadith, understand the chain of narration of a hadith, the weak hadith, the strong hadith, and how they can use those hadith in order to deduct or extract the Sharia rulings. The other requirements as well, the understanding the Arabic language, its usage and its meanings. Because that will help interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah in order to reach the Sharia rulings. Other requirements like understanding or having deep knowledge of abrogation in Quran, the science of Quran, and also usul al-fiqh, which is the principles of fiqh, how to deduct and extract the Sharia rulings and understand it. So those requirements, for example, they were listed by Al-Imam al-Shawkani. There are even more requirements listed by the Imam al-Suyuti. He listed around 11 requirements for a person to be called a scholar. And the scholar would guide and help people in terms of their religion, will interpret Sharia rulings, will find a solution, because we know Sharia is a system that would require new rulings as we advance in time and in different places. So Al-Imam al-Basri said Sharia is applicable in every time and in every place. And those mechanisms of Sharia helps in terms of deducting the new ruling or dealing with various issues, whether related to financial transactions or other aspects of our life, in order to find the solution by a qualified scholar.
Okay, Humayun, if I could just bring you into the conversation. I mean, that's very comprehensive in terms of the knowledge base that is required to become a Sharia scholar. But what qualifies a Sharia scholar to make such huge decisions within the Islamic financial sector? Do they also have to be well qualified or have a tremendous understanding of finance too?
Yeah, in addition to being an alim or scholar, the Sharia scholars or Sharia advisors in Islamic finance, they must be experts in the jurisprudence of financial transactions. This is called fiqh al-muamalat al-maliyya. And they must understand the financial matters in general. In case of banking and finance, they must have sufficiently deep understanding of financial and banking products.
Can I just ask you on that point? So are many of these scholars actually financiers by trade, or do they have to then, or are they just people who are well versed in the Quran and, you know, all Islamic teachings, but also have to learn about finance? Or do you have a combination of the both?
There are 3 tiers of Sharia scholars involved in Islamic finance. Tier 1 Sharia scholars, they got involved in Islamic finance by virtue of being very reputable Sharia scholars. When they got involved in Islamic finance, they learned financial matters and the issues around them. Tier 2, or the second generation of Sharia scholars, Most of them, they are Sharia experts, as well as they have degrees and qualifications in financial matters as well. A third generation is now coming, which is experts in financial matters as well as in Sharia matters as well. And this is the new generation which I believe is going to drive the Islamic financial services industry.
Samir, talking about moving forward and the new generation, obviously digital plays a huge role in our lives, and especially in finance, fintech, and it will continue to do so. So will the role of the Sharia scholar change moving forward? Because we can't work with outmoded practices moving forward if everything becomes digital.
As I mentioned earlier, Sharia is very flexible. Yes, we have constant fixed Sharia rules that we cannot change. For example, riba is haram, full stop, something we cannot change. But we have many Sharia rules that are flexible in order to address any new issues, whether fintechs, any new financial instruments. But I just would like to draw the line between what we call Islamic finance experts. Those are not scholars. Scholars would require many qualifications, a deep knowledge of certain sciences in Sharia.
And do they get some sort of certification which they then present to financial institutions, especially if they're making fatwas, rulings?
To be a scholar, you have to be recognized by your peers, by other scholars. We have, unfortunately, few self-proclaimed scholars. Or maybe they do a course for 2 years, they get a title, and they introduce themselves as sheikh or mufti or a scholar. But when you put them to the test, to the real test, you will find that they lack the depth of Sharia and they don't have those qualifications. So scholars, it's qualifications, whether academic, extensive private study, and study with other scholars in order to have that in-depth knowledge. And this will make you basically recognized by your peers, by other scholars who would acknowledge this knowledge. And people then become known as this person is a scholar because of this interaction with others.
Humayun, is that sufficient, just being recognised by your peers, or does there need to be some sort of standard implemented? I know that in Malaysia they're quite rigorous about Sharia scholars. Does there need to be a more universal standard being implemented?
Recognition in the Sharia community is a basic requirement. However, now the regulators around the world, they have developed fit and proper criteria for those who can serve as Sharia advisors. I must differentiate between the term Sharia scholars and Sharia advisors. Sharia scholars are mostly the scholars who come from Islamic classical tradition. Sharia advisors, on the other hand side, they can be university graduates with a focus on Sharia. For example, International Islamic University Malaysia and International Islamic University in Islamabad, they have LLB in Sharia and law courses. A number of graduates of these courses, they are now serving as Sharia advisors for Islamic banks and financial institutions. And in addition to that, as I said, the regulators, they have come up with fit and proper criteria, and these must be fulfilled by anyone to serve as a Sharia advisor for an Islamic financial institution.
Okay, so Samir, there's also Sharia boards, and especially in relation to financial institutions. Could you just clarify what a Sharia board is and what their role is, what they do?
A Sharia board is a number of scholars, usually as identified by a UFI, which is the accounting and auditing organization for Islamic financial institutions, in their Sharia and governance standards, that any financial institution should have a minimum of 3 scholars. Those scholars, as we mentioned, they should have the required criteria and fit and proper criteria, which also described in AUFI standards. Those scholars would guide the financial institution and advise it on a Sharia matter and matters related to the Islamic commercial law, fiqh al-muamalat. This is the minimum number, so the number could be more than 3 based on the requirements of the institution itself. The role of the Sharia scholars on the Sharia boards is basically to look into the product documentations, the services offered by by the financial institution themselves, certify them, issued fatwas or Sharia compliance certificates to guide the consumers or the market that those products are being reviewed by an independent Sharia supervisory committee for that institution and is being certified as Sharia compliant products or services. They maintain the Sharia compliance of the Islamic financial institution. And I would like to note here, they are not employees of the bank. The Sharia Supervisory Committee is an independent committee which is appointed by the General Assembly of the Islamic financial institutions.
So how do they get paid? Who pays them?
Of course, the financial institution pays their fees. The General Assembly. So they don't report to the board of directors or to the executives of the banks or the senior management. Basically, their payment, like any other professional, let's say a solicitor or an accountant or an external auditor. So if you pay a solicitor to get their legal advice, they will provide their legal advice, and paying their fees for their time and effort wouldn't compromise that legal advice, because they will refer to the laws, to the applicable laws, and explain your legal position based on the law. Similarly, the role of Sharia scholars regarding the Islamic financial institutions, they explain the Sharia requirements and the Sharia compliance aspects for any financial products or transactions done by the bank, and guide the bank to do those transactions within those Sharia requirements and within the framework of Sharia compliance.
Now, Humayun, Reuters news agency, a very well respected and established news agency, has previously quoted an unnamed banker as saying that some scholars charge around $1,000 to $1,500 per hour of consultation, in addition to an annual bonus of between $10,000 and $20,000 per board seat. Other industries have quoted higher figures. For these reasons, these inconsistencies in fees, that's why they don't have to be made public. There's no consistent fee across the board. So given that the number of Islamic scholars who are in existence, who operate, there's few, so are they exploiting their position?
I must say that there is an overemphasis on the fees paid to Sharia scholars. The fee of $1,000 to $1,500 or maybe $2,000 per hour or per day in certain cases, this is not out of the norm in the industry. It's actually below the fees paid to other consultants and accountants, etc., in the financial services industry. This is true that Sharia scholars, they get annual retainers as well, which may be $15,000, $20,000, or in some cases a lot more than that. Okay. The issue is not why Sharia scholars are paid. As Samir has mentioned, they are paid because they offer distinct services to...
I think nobody's criticizing them receiving payment, because obviously for any kind of job or service offered, there is a payment in return. I think the controversy was around the quantities or the fees they were charging. People, critics were complaining that they were taken advantage of their position, given that there's so few in the industry.
No, I don't think this is a valid argument. Okay. As I said, if someone is getting $1,000 or $15,000 or $50,000, okay, this is money which they are getting for their services. And by the way, there are not only a few Sharia scholars now in the industry. Actually, now there is oversupply of Sharia scholars in the global Islamic financial services industry. The figures people have been quoting, they are about 15 to 20 years old. At that time, there was a definite shortage of Sharia scholars. Now there is, as I said, the third generation of Sharia scholars. They have started entering the market. Because of this supply-demand dynamics, the fees of Sharia scholars, they have gone down significantly.
Okay, so Samir, there's another element. Whilst most Sharia scholars do a great job and they're really facilitating the industry, Islamic finance industry, there are some that have, there's been expressions coined as fatwa shopping and scholars for dollars, essentially meaning that people tout their financial product around several scholars until it gets certification. What are your thoughts on this? And, have you experienced this, or is this prevalent within the industry?
In fact, I haven't experienced this myself or within my institution. However, there is some truth to it, but it's not that widely experienced or widely practiced aspect. It's basically, eventually, if you go to whoever certify your product, a scholar has to maintain their honesty and credibility in the market. So it's not a one product or one transaction, one-off transaction, then get paid and that's it. No, basically they will get exposed. The market is open. Everything now is
impact
known.
on their reputation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The fatwa has to be made public. So other scholars will look into it. Other institutions, if they want to invest in this product, they will discuss the fatwa and the documentation of that financial product with their scholars. So any scholar who tries to take shortcuts would be exposed immediately. So it's not something that credible scholars with a high reputation in the market would do. The other thing, the Sharia Supervisory Committee or scholars, they are appointed for that institution. The institution is not allowed to leave its appointed scholars and go to find other scholars who basically could certify their transactions or their financial product. And in my experience, many transactions or many cases that we declined, and the bank maybe made a loss compared to conventional banks, but that was the Sharia position, and the bank accepted that, and that's basically the Sharia governance.
Okay, so Humayu, I just want to move the conversation on to careers within Islamic finance as a Sharia scholar. You talked about the third generation. So I know that in the UK, more and more universities are offering an Islamic finance or Sharia-based degrees, and of course we've got NCF and there's institutions around other Muslim-majority countries. So what kind of prospects are there available for anybody who wants, to get involved in this as a career?
As Sharia advisor or Sharia scholar?
Yes.
I must say that, the institutions in UK, most of them, they do not offer qualifications which would make these people Sharia advisors. The degrees are related with Islamic finance, so they become Islamic finance experts. Most of the Sharia scholars and Sharia advisors, still they come from the traditional Islamic background, and they top up their classical Islamic education with a degree in finance or Islamic finance, in banking, etc. And hence they become recognized Sharia scholars or Sharia advisors. A lot of new Sharia scholars, they are coming from the Muslim countries because there is a tradition of Islamic scholarship over there. I am not aware that there is any systematic effort in the United Kingdom to develop a new breed of Sharia scholars for the global Islamic financial services industry.
So it's more based around entering into the Islamic finance space as a financier?
That's right, to start with, but if you want to serve as a Sharia advisor or Sharia scholar, you must have a relevant degree, which in most cases would be offered by an institution in the Muslim world or the countries where Muslims are in significant numbers and proportion.
Okay, Samir, I'd like to move the discussion now to another universal problem we have, is gender equality. Now, looking at the Islamic finance space and in particular Sharia scholars, Malaysia does quite well for, female representation. Indonesia is moving up the ladder, but why is there a problem? Why do we have an underrepresentation of women within Islamic finance?
In fact, that's true. Basically, the scholarly sphere, whether in Islamic finance or not in Islamic finance, is dominated by male scholars. or male Sharia advisors or Islamic finance advisors. And that's possibly because women are not incentivized to enter this field or this discipline.
How could they be?
Could be possibly by highlighting the potential for them to study, to do Islamic studies or Sharia degrees, then enter the Islamic finance market, works for bank. I know, for example, some of the banks in the GCC, their internal Sharia compliance officer or advisor is a female advisor. It started to move on towards gender equality within that aspect. However, we are still a way behind that. For example, if I want to recruit for the Sharia compliance department in the bank, most applicants would be male applicants.
Okay, let me involve Dr. Humayun in this. Humayun, there's a lot of men in the industry, as we well know. What can they do to facilitate more women?
It's actually male dominance. This is a characteristic of financial services industry in general.
In general, it's true, but we are specifically talking about Islamic finance.
And Islamic finance is not an exception. I must say that within Islamic banking and finance, there is a lot of emphasis on bringing women on board. Okay. A number of banks, whether they're conventional or Islamic in the Muslim world, especially in the GCC, in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE as well, there are female-only branches where female employees offer banking services to their clients. So this is one way of promoting the role of women in Islamic finance. Sharia advisory is a domain where Malaysia has done wonders.
It's dominating.
That's right. Okay, and because of that, the recognition of women or female Sharia advisors is taking place in other parts of the world. Now we have examples in Africa, in Asia, where female Sharia scholars, they are helping the industry as well. So I would say that that there is a definite recognition within the industry that women should be empowered through Islamic finance, and there is some kind of positive discrimination in certain countries when it comes to filling a new role in an Islamic bank.
Okay, well, it's great to hear that women are increasingly being introduced into the Islamic finance sector. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Humayun, Samir, thank you so much for your contribution today.
Thank you for it.
As mentioned earlier, we'll be exploring a different aspect or issue related to Islamic finance as we progress through this series, so do tune in every week. Also, if you'd like to comment or share your thoughts and opinions on what we've discussed today, then tweet us at Islam Channel or contact us via Facebook on Islam Channel TV with hashtag The Islamic Finance Show. We'd love to hear your thoughts and views. Next week, we'll look at fintech and discuss how tech is changing the landscape of finance and improving financial inclusion for those previously with no access to financial services, something many of us take for granted. Many thanks again to my guests today for joining me, and of course to you watching at home. See you next time.